What's going on, guys? It's me, Zachary Steele, bringing you guys another fantasy football video. In this one, I'm going to go over players I think you should be looking to buy low and sell high on ahead of week 4. This will be after week 3. And basically, I'll go through each position: quarterback, running back, receiver, tight end, and sort of give you a couple names that I think are either overperforming or underperforming, or sort of explain to you why I think these players should be ones you're looking to involve in trades, whether that's selling or trade or buying them. So for starters, with the quarterback position, it's not a whole lot here, just because of the scarcity of the quarterback position. It's really hard to find. It's really hard to trade quarterbacks in general in fantasy because generally everybody has their starting quarterback and doesn't have two. So you're gonna have a hard time finding a team that A, needs a quarterback, or B, has an extra quarterback to give you if you need one. But I do think Dak Prescott is a bit of a buy low. He's looked really good and like a really sharp NFL quarterback these last several weeks, and it just hasn't really translated to fantasy performance. We all know that he's extremely talented. He's got extremely talented receivers and just hasn't necessarily materialized in fantasy production yet. But I'm not necessarily buying that this defense is as good as it's looked the last 2 weeks. The Cowboys are going to be a team that ends up in a lot of shootouts, and Dak Prescott's a quarterback that's going to really carry them in those games. I do think Dak is a fringe top 5 quarterback the rest of the season, and he's not performed like that yet. So he's worth looking at in terms of acquiring. And the only other quarterback I'd really be looking to buy right now is Jalen Hurts. He is one of 4 quarterbacks who's been a top 12 fantasy quarterback each week this season. It's him, Mahomes, Kyler Murray, and Tom Brady. And what's crazy about that is if you just watch the games, especially the last 2, he's looked pretty bad. So that basically what you're seeing right there is the floor he's giving you. Since he entered the league as a starter in week 14 last year, he's 10th in the NFL in rushing yards, which is absolutely insane given that he plays the quarterback position. Jalen Hurts is going to give you 60 plus rushing yards every night, and that gives you just a really safe floor, so he can perform poorly like he has the last 2 weeks and still gives you that 20.4 that you're looking for at the quarterback position. And we've seen it in that week 1 against the Falcons. He had that blow up game, and I expect this week to be another one against the Chiefs. The Eagles are going to lose this game, but it's going to be a shootout. Jalen Hurts is going to put up a lot of fantasy points to even make that game close to competitive. So the window, I believe, closes on Jalen Hurts for now, and he is one of those quarterbacks that I think managers may have as their backup quarterback because he was going in that QB 10 area in drafts. So there's a chance that they have a starter and then him behind them. So if you are thin at quarterback, I would go look at the Jalen Hurts manager and see what you can get for him. So at the running back position, there's a lot of names here. So number 1 for me is still Tony Pollard. He simply just looks like the better running back in Dallas. I know that Ezekiel Elliott had a really good game this last week, 2 touchdowns. He was good the week before, but the fact of the matter is when Tony Pollard gets the ball, that offense looks way more dynamic than when Ezekiel Elliott gets the ball. Tony Pollard is basically up to almost Kareem Hunt value in my mind, in that you can play him as a flex every week because they're using him in the passing game. He's getting 10 to 15 touches every week, so he's got value in what's a high-powered offense, and he's getting valuable touches. But then if something were to happen to Zeke in terms of health, or if the Cowboys were to make more of a shift to him, he could easily be a top 10 running back the rest of the season. And people simply don't value him like that. You can probably trade a wide receiver 3 for Tony Pollard. You're going to have to trade a starter, but you can start Pollard himself, and the upside is just tremendous with him. And that's how you win your league, is you get guys that are not necessarily performing to the level that you think they can reach. And then when you trade for them, they reach that level, and that allows you to really improve your roster week in and week out. And Tony Pollard's the guy that gives you a chance to do that. Chase Edmonds is another guy I'd really be looking to target. He's actually done moderately well so far in fantasy. He's averaging around 14 fantasy points per game. He's been a top 20 fantasy running back. So he's been exactly what you drafted him to be, but he hasn't really had a blow up game yet. And with the amount of points and the production that we're getting out of the Arizona offense, I think there's going to be huge fantasy games ahead of him. I do worry about him in terms of health. He's certainly a running back that has shown a little bit of an injury history, and he's got a hard time staying healthy for a whole 17 game season. But while he's healthy, I do think he's going to be a lock it in RB2, and he's going to have some boom weeks where he's really good for you. And I just don't think he's all that expensive. Obviously, it's really hard to trade for running backs in fantasy because there are about 20 guys really worth starting every week. And most teams are going to have 2 running backs worth playing, especially when you get into deeper leagues. So it is going to be hard to pry Chase Edmonds from a roster, but any fantasy manager that has 3 running backs, and Chase Edmonds is one of them, is likely to be at least willing to consider partying with Chase Edmonds. I do think Chase Edmonds has top 15 running back, basically a floor the rest of the season. And I do see a world where that production really jumps up. You saw James Conner vulture 2 touchdowns this last week. If one of those had gone to Chase Edmonds, he'd actually look a lot different in terms of fantasy production. So Better days are ahead for Chase Edmonds, and he's been good already, so I'd be happy to have him on the roster. Then another buy low here is David Montgomery. David Montgomery is actually a really talented running back. And as you all probably know, if you were a Bear last Sunday, you had a bad day. David Montgomery could not escape that. That offense was just horrible. I'm almost willing to throw out that game because it was literally the second worst offensive performance in the last 100 years in terms of yards per play. The offense might be bad, and I agree with you. It's probably going to be a bad offense, but it's not going to be a historically bad offense. There's talented players there, and I don't think Justin Fields is even that bad. It was just a rough game. There's really poor game plan against a really good pass rush. It's just a bad matchup. But this offense is going to do enough, and David Montgomery is going to be involved enough that he's going to be a fringe top 10 running back the rest of the season. And there are very few running backs out there that are getting this kind of workload David Montgomery's getting. He's getting 15 plus carries on the ground, and then he's getting volume in the receiving game. And it's just hard to find that in fantasy, and he's just not performed the last 2 weeks. So David Montgomery is another guy I'd just be really happy to have on the roster, and he's a lock it in RB2 with RB1 upside each week. Another guy that's been probably really frustrating for you if you've rostered him so far this season is Jonathan Taylor. As you all know, Jonathan Taylor has performed pretty poorly so far this season. Granted, pretty much every Colt has. But the reason there's optimism for me here is that he doesn't have a touchdown yet. And he's getting a lot of goal line and red zone carries that just have not materialized into touchdowns yet. I get it. They just lost Quentin Nelson for a little bit here this week, but better days are ahead for Jonathan Taylor. This week, they get to play the Miami Dolphins, who just gave up over 100 yards rushing to Peyton Barber. The Dolphins have not looked special on defense. I think that more and more the Colts are going to have to shift towards the running game. I was really surprised that he only had 10 carries last week. He had 10 for 64. In a game where Carson Wentz was playing on 2 bad ankles, you'd think they would give him more work. They didn't. They definitely have to if they want to be a competitive team. I still think they've got hopes of making the playoffs. And I think they're actually a much better roster than they've been so far, because really it's the same roster as it was last year, except they have Carson Wentz instead of Phillip Rivers. I don't think Phillip Rivers was anything special. Better days are ahead for Jonathan Taylor. The Colts have also just said that they're putting Marlon Mack on the trade market. So Marlon Mack will likely be a healthy scratch the last couple of weeks. I wasn't personally worried about Marlon Mack, but he did get some work in week 2. So I get it. Nyheim Hines is most certainly something I'd be a little bit concerned about. But Jonathan Taylor is a really capable pass catcher as well. He's a guy they don't need to take out on third down. He's going to get about a 70% snap share this season. He's going to get all the goal line work. He's probably going to finish the season with 8 touchdowns or more. It's just weird that he hasn't scored one yet. Better days are ahead for Jonathan Taylor. He's still a top 10 running back in my mind, and likely the manager for Jonathan Taylor is just really frustrated with him. If there's a time to get Jonathan Taylor, it's right now. Another buy low for me is Joe Mixon. I get it. He's a guy that's probably burned you before if you've had him, but the volume is there. There are next to no true workhorse running backs in the NFL anymore, but Joe Mixon himself is one of them. He's getting all the volume. He gets a juicy matchup this week against the Jacksonville Jaguars. If you remember, that was the team that he absolutely blew up on against last season. I would not be shocked at all if Joe Mixon has a 150 rush yard, 2 touchdown performance tomorrow. And like I've said, he's going to be a top 10 running back when healthy. I'm not worried about his injury history with last year. I think they were just really overly precautious in what was sort of a lost season. And honestly, with the way the running back landscape is, he might be a top 5 running back going forward. I get it. He's not sexy. He's hurt you before, but he's talented. He's getting the volume, and it's going to be an offense that scores enough points to give him touchdown upside. And again, Joe Mixon's sort of disappointed since week 1. The volume's still been there, though, so I'd certainly be looking to add Joe Mixon. Better days are ahead. The volume's going to even out. And then lastly, Tyson Williams, sort of a lower tier guy, but if you played Tyson Williams this last week, which you probably did if you had him, you were extremely disappointed. You probably felt like he never got the ball. And you're right, but he led the Baltimore Ravens in offensive snaps, the running back position. He's still the RB1 in an offense that's going to score a lot of points and run the ball a lot. Of the running backs on that roster, he also seems to offer the most in the passing game. So especially in PPR formats, I do think Tyson Williams is extremely valuable. I think Tyson Williams is going to be a guy that you can start as a low-end RB2 or a flex each week. And given that he was picked up off the waivers and just had an absolute dud of a week, I bet you can get him pretty cheap from the manager in your league. Just go see. Like I've said, the running back landscape is super tough. If you're hurting at running back and you don't want to break the bank to get one, Tyson Williams is certainly an option worth looking into. And then sell highs for me. Obviously, with the running back position, it is really hard to really sell high on any running back because if you have a running back that's producing for you, you probably need him to keep producing for you. So it's really hard to trade running backs. But if you do have depth at the running back position, you have one of these guys, it's definitely worth moving them. First off, James Robinson. I love the talent in James Robinson. I absolutely love him. I think he's extremely talented, and I don't understand why the Jaguars simply don't want to make him the focal point of that offense and maybe help the rookie quarterback out. But Urban Meyer doesn't seem interested in doing that. James Robinson had a 59% snap share this week, which was down from last week. And even though he scored the touchdown and got 5 or 6 receptions, I just don't think that's volume that can continue with the snap share he's getting. And I just think he's going to be a low end RB2 the rest of the season, and it's really sad. But I think that with what you just saw last week, which was a monster performance out of him, and then a couple of that with the performance that anybody who saw what he did last year, and just knowing how talented he is, I think a lot of people do think James Robinson has top 15 running back upside and might meet that. And I think it's possible, but I just don't think I want to bet on it. I don't want to bet on Urban Meyer actually evolving him the way he should. And I think you can trade him for quite a bit right now. And if you can get a solid RB2, I would trade James Robinson for David Montgomery right now. I would trade him for Chase Edmonds. So if you could go propose a trade like that, or go to a team that needs a running back and has good receivers, and we can touch on some of my buy low receivers later. But if you have James Robinson and you can afford to lose him, I would definitely at least poke around and see what people are offering. Melvin Gordon's another sell high for me. He scored again last week, and overall, this Denver team just has not been able to run the ball very effectively. Not getting much push out of the offensive line. So even though they're 3-0, it's been mostly through the air, and then the running backs have punched it in, so it's sort of saved their value. But if you take out Melvin Gordon's 70-yard touchdown run in week 1, he's really been extremely inefficient and has not offered much. And I do expect Javonte Williams to get more and more involved as the season goes on. So I think it's just going to be really hard for Melvin Gordon to sustain the production he's giving you right now. And like I said, the running back position is an absolute nightmare. You definitely drafted Melvin Gordon late enough that he was not supposed to be a starter for you, but there will probably be a team that absolutely needs him. Especially go to a 1-2 or 0-3 team that's starting Nyheim Hines as their running back every week, and offer them Melvin Gordon. He will be a big upgrade to them in the moment. They need wins now. If you're 2-1, 3-0, you can afford to get rid of a starter right now. And Melvin Gordon's only going to get worse as the season goes on, and he's actually been pretty good for fantasy so far, and I think you can get a decent amount for him. Then lastly, I've got Zach Moss in here. He's had 2 straight good weeks. I do think Zach Moss is relatively talented, but I just don't buy the fact that the Buffalo Bills are going to actually be able to create a fantasy viable running back option every week. They aren't a team that's interested in running the ball very often. And on top of that, they scored 45 points this last week. As good as that offense is, they're not going to average 45 points. Zach Moss has 3 touchdowns over the last 2 weeks. That's obviously unsustainable. Josh Allen is going to steal a lot of goal line work for both of the running backs in Buffalo. So I think the touchdown upside for both of them is actually really low, despite what we've seen the last 2 weeks. And like I said, Zach Moss last 2 weeks has been absolutely awesome. There are definitely a lot of people in your league that would be happy to have him, and would probably start him right now. And I really would not want to be starting Zach Moss. I could be wrong. Maybe he goes off the next couple weeks, and then I'm here telling you that I was wrong. But the Buffalo Bills don't seem like a team that want to run the ball. They've got 2 running backs that touch it, so there's just a really small pie, and it's being shared between 2 guys. If you can get anything, if you can get a viable starter for Zach Moss, just do it. So moving on to the wide receiver position, my first buy low is Stephon Diggs. I just touched on the Buffalo Bills and how they absolutely exploded this last week. And despite that offensive explosion, Stephon Diggs finished the game with 14 fantasy points. That's just fluky to me. You had Cole Beasley finish the game with like 9 for 98. And you saw Emmanuel Sanders catch 2 touchdowns. Stephon Diggs hasn't scored, or he has 1 touchdown so far this season. He has not really had a signature big game yet. And I'm not worried about it at all. The air yards are there. The target share is there. I do expect you to see a slight decrease in the targets he had last season. I believe he finished the season with 166 targets, or maybe it was 156. Regardless, you're going to see a little bit of regression there just because he was absolutely hyper targeted by Josh Allen, but he's still going to be a top 5 fantasy receiver, and he just hasn't been that yet. And despite having not blown up yet, he's been good every week. He's not burned you, unlike some of these other studs have. And he's just going to offer you a really safe floor, and we all know he's a deep threat. He's just a really talented receiver and a really talented offense. He's going to have some big blow-up games, and I'd be you could be super excited with him as your wide receiver 1, and I would be happy to trade to get him at the right price. Another buy low for me, I'm going out on a limb here, and I'm saying that Allen Robinson is still a buy low. I know he's been absolutely abysmal, but the whole Bears offense it's not going to be this bad. Allen Robinson has shown over the course of his career that he can work very well with any quarterback at the helm. It's just very hard to put up a good fantasy outing when your quarterback completes 6 passes in a game. He actually caught a third of the passes that were completed. He's given 6 targets for a 30% target share. Those are good numbers. It's just not translating to fantasy points. He's averaging about 7 yards in terms of average depth of target. That's absolutely abysmal. I do expect that to improve as the season goes on. The offense really will look to get a lot of quick passes out with the pass rush they were facing. I think the pass protection should get a little bit better. Obviously, it's bad, but it really can't be as bad as it's been. I think the Bears are going to make an effort to roll out the quarterback more often, especially if Justin Fields remains a starter. However, right now I would sort of expect Andy Dalton to start this week. But to be completely honest, Andy Dalton's the best quarterback Allen Robinson's ever had. It's really sad, but Andy Dalton gives Allen Robinson the floor that you thought he was going to have coming into the season. I personally still view Allen Robinson as a wide receiver 2 the rest of the season. I no longer really think he's got that wide receiver 1 upside, but you are hearing people say that Allen Robinson's a drop candidate, or that you'd rather have, I don't know, just people are really down on Allen Robinson. And trust me, I own him in 2 leagues. I was in on Allen Robinson. I'm absolutely crushed by how he's been so far this season, but I'm holding. I'm not looking to trade Allen Robinson because nobody's going to give you the value that you're looking to get for him. But I would happily trade Allen Robinson for, I would consider trading Allen Robinson for a respectable player. And I think that me thinking he's a buy low and still being willing and open to trading him, I think that you're going to have a lot of fantasy managers out there that are willing to trade Allen Robinson for pennies on the dollar just because of how bad he's been and how burnt they felt by him. 3 here, I've got Calvin Ridley. The Falcons offense has just been really bad so far this season. Calvin Ridley has yet to exceed 63 receiving yards in a game. I think that changes going forward. I'm just not necessarily concerned about it. He's still clearly the number 1 wide receiver in an offense that's going to have to be pass heavy. Their defense does not scare me. They're going to be in shootouts. It just has not happened yet. Calvin Ridley is going to have much better days. He's still a top 10 receiver. He's probably top 5. It just hasn't materialized yet. Nothing's changed for me on that. And I think that you can probably you might be able to go trade Mike Williams for Calvin Ridley, and I would do that because Mike Williams has been absolutely awesome. It's going to be really hard. I'll touch on Mike Williams later, but my point being is Calvin Ridley's a buy low just because nothing's really changed for him. It's just been a stretch of 3 Mac games. He hasn't burned you. He just hasn't been a top 5 receiver you paid for, and it's just receivers are statistically less consistent than running backs. There are going to be ups and downs with the receiver position, but Calvin Ridley's got the talent and an offense that's going to utilize him heavily, so I want him. At 4 here, I've got Brandon Ayuk. We actually finally saw him get on the field quite a bit last Sunday. He finished the game with an 86% snap share, which that's the number that I really want to focus on there, is that unlike week 1 and 2, Brandon Ayuk is on the field. And if he's on the field, he contributes. It was his first game getting legitimate action. He scored a touchdown, but he was still relatively quiet outside of that. I believe he was 4 for 36. So I still think there's a really solid buy window on him because of the disappointment he's been over the first 3 weeks. But he gets to play Seattle this week. I'm a Seahawks fan. Let me tell you, our defense is horrible. We just let the Vikings go up and down the field the whole game. The Vikings didn't punt on us, unless they might have with like 2 minutes left, but they didn't have a meaningful punt in that entire game. The Seahawks cannot stop anybody. Their cornerbacks are awful. Brandon Ayuk is going to absolutely eat this week, and any sort of buy window on him is going to be absolutely slammed shut. He's going to have an awesome season. He's extremely talented. For the same reason I'm really high on him. That's why Deebo Samuel makes the so high list. I'll touch on that later. But Brandon Ayuk is extremely talented. He's seeing the field. He's going to blow up this week, and you won't be able to trade for him after that. He's going to be a wide receiver 2 for you the rest of the season, and you do not have to pay that right now. So just go see what the Brandon Ayuk manager wants for him. He's an awesome talent and an offense that's going to produce enough. They're going to manufacture touches for him, and he's going to be consistent going forward. And then lastly, I've got Chase Claypool here. There's a couple things to go into that. Number one, you've just seen all the injuries in Pittsburgh. Juju's banged up with the ribs, and we don't know exactly the status on Deontay Johnson, but I do expect him to at least miss this week. And Deontay Johnson's got a bit of an injury history, so I do think there's going to be games in which Chase Claypool is at least one of two healthy receivers in Pittsburgh, and he is really, him and Najee Harris have accounted for, I believe, 48 or 50% of the team's total yards this season. That's absolutely insane. Chase Claypool is especially valuable in half PPR or non-PPR leagues because he's not going to be a guy that finishes a game with 10 catches, but he's going to be a guy that finishes with 3 for 90 and a touchdown. And I'd be really happy to play Chase Claypool as my wide receiver 3 or flex. He's been relatively bad so far to start the season. And I do agree, Big Ben is washed. I don't think he's as washed as he's been. I do think better days are ahead for Pittsburgh's offense, at least a little bit. They've got a relatively decent matchup this week against the Packers. And I would just, sooner or later, Chase Claypool is going to have that blow-up game that we all know he has in him. And when he does, you won't be able to trade for him. So I want to get him before that happens. So moving on to the sell highs. None of these guys are guys I necessarily don't think are legitimate players. I think they're all performing just above what they're going to do the rest of the season. And that's why I'd be looking to move them. So number one for me is Mike Williams. He's currently the wide receiver 2 in fantasy behind Cooper Kupp. And that's awesome. I'm really happy for him. He's extremely talented. And I won't take that away from him. But I do still believe that he's the number 2 receiver on this offense. And on top of that, he's got a very long history of missing games due to injury. He's healthy right now. I hope he stays healthy the rest of the season. But I think you can trade Mike Williams for Calvin Ridley or for Stephon Diggs or for Tyreek Hill. You can get a lot for Mike Williams, or you can package him with a running back, a lower end RB2, and get a top 5 running back. And as much as Mike Williams will probably finish the season as a top 15 fantasy wide receiver, I think that over the course of the next 14 games, he'll probably be a wide receiver 2. And that's if he stays healthy. And like I said, I don't ever want to assume injury or count on an injury happening for a player, but Mike Williams has a long enough history of when he goes up for a pass, he jumps as high as he can and he falls straight down very hard. He does it all the time. And it's just been very hard throughout his career for him to stay healthy. And I think this is the highest his value is ever going to get. If you trade him and he keeps it up, well, okay, you sold high. You got out of there. You got all the value you were going to because you sold high. And if you don't trade him and he gets hurt or he comes back down to earth a little bit, you'll wish you trade him. So I don't think you can really lose by trading him. Just make sure you do get top tier. I want a wide receiver 1 or an RB1 for Mike Williams, or at least a top 15 player at each position. Just make sure that you're filling a positional need with it, because you didn't draft Mike Williams to be your every week starter. There's the old adage, you can't go broke taking a profit. Selling Mike Williams right now is taking a profit, and at the worst, you will have gotten out ahead. I hope Mike Williams is awesome the rest of the season. I think he's going to have a career year. He's already had a career year, but I don't see this production continuing throughout the course of the season. Deebo Samuel, sort of a similar argument to Mike Williams. I personally still believe that Brandon Ayuk will finish the season as number 1 wide receiver in San Francisco. On top of that, Deebo Samuel, same thing as Mike Williams. He's got that injury history. I don't necessarily think I can count on Deebo Samuel to stay healthy over the course of the season. He's a guy that I want in my lineup every week that he's healthy, but I don't know how long he's going to be healthy for. I think he's going to cede a lot of targets to Brandon Ayuk getting involved. And I think the 49ers are going to make an effort to involve George Kittle more often in the offense. So as awesome as a player as Deebo Samuel is, I think he's going to be a much better player in the NFL than he will be a fantasy player so far, or the rest of the season, just because he's going to start getting a lot more touches near the line of scrimmage. He's going to get a lot of end arounds, a lot of wide receiver screens. They're going to try and get him in space, but I think that's really going to limit his floor going forward, or limit his ceiling going forward. And then lastly, they've got Jamar Chase here. Jamar Chase has been absolutely phenomenal so far. I'm happy to see that his performance in the preseason was largely fluky. However, he scored 4 touchdowns on 11 catches. That's not sustainable. So that's really what I'm saying here, is that you're going to see a legitimate drop-off in the touchdown equity he gets going forward. And you know what? He's probably going to have a really good game again tomorrow. So if you want to wait and let him eat up the Jaguars defense with T. Higgins out, and then trade Jamar Chase when T. Higgins comes back, I think that's also a really good strategy, but I would at least go out there and see what you can get for Jamar Chase. Offer Jamar Chase to somebody, shoot high, let them say no, let Jamar Chase go off tomorrow, and then make the same offer the next week because they will maybe be regretting not having Jamar on their roster. Jamar Chase is a really talented player. He's going to be a high-end wide receiver 3, low-end wide receiver 2 the rest of the season, in my opinion. But he's been a low-end wide receiver 1 so far, and I just don't see that continuing. And moving on to tight ends, 3 buy lows for me. Number 1 being Noah Fant. He had a relatively down week this last week against the Jets in a game where the Broncos just didn't have to do much on offense. But with the injury to KJ Hamler, there are really only three reliable pass catchers in this offense with Noah Fant, Tim Patrick, and Cortland Sutton. Noah Fant's going to get a relatively massive target share for a tight end, and he's a guy that can do a lot with the ball in his hands after the catch. I think that after you get out of that top tier of tight ends, those top 6, Noah Fant's a pretty clear 7 for me. And I think Noah Fant's going to be a lock-it-in starter the rest of the season just because of how thin the tight end position is. And I'd be really happy and really comfortable with Noah Fant as my tight end going forward this season. Next, I've got TJ Hawkinson. It's probably hard to get him, but he did have a down week against the Baltimore Ravens this last week after his massive game against the Packers. You're going to have to trade quite a bit for him, but I do personally believe that TJ Hawkinson is going to be the tight end 3 this season. It'll be Kelsey, Waller, Hawkinson. I think Kittle's going to be close, but I do think Hawkinson's got more. He's going to get a larger target share than Kittle will, and I just think that's going to result in more fantasy points and more consistency. If you've got bench assets that are good that you just can't play, go look at the team that has TJ Hawkinson, see if they've got any holes in their lineup, and just see if there's anything you can work out. So maybe you've got a Dallas Goedert you can pair with a good bench receiver you're not playing for Hawkinson. I'd be really happy to do that. And then lastly, I've got Kyle Pitts. People seem to be really upset with the performance they're getting out of him so far. It just doesn't make sense to me because we all know how steep the learning curve is for tight ends in the NFL, especially as rookies. You should not have drafted Kyle Pitts expecting him to just come out of the gates on fire. He's an extremely talented player, and I do view him as more of a receiver than a tight end. The Giants basically schemed Kyle Pitts out of the game this last week, and it is concerning that you can see that defenses can do that, but Kyle Pitts is extremely talented, and like you all know, the tight end position absolutely sucks. It's really hard to get a week in and week out start at the tight end position, and I don't think many tight ends give you any more upside than Kyle Pitts has, and he's not going to be that expensive for you right now. He's disappointed so far, and the whole Falcons offense is disappointed so far, but better days are ahead for them. Kyle Pitts will get more comfortable in the NFL. I expect a really, really solid second half out of Kyle Pitts, and I'm not necessarily saying to trade for him this week, but he's just a guy that as the season goes on, I expect him to get better and better. So I believe the window will keep closing and closing the longer you wait on him. And then like the quarterback position, along with the running back position, it's really hard to sell high on tight ends just because if you have one, you need them. But maybe you were rostering a guy like Dalton Schultz as your backup tight end. He just blew up for 2 touchdowns on Monday. He is going to have a hard time being very valuable going forward because him and Blake Jarwin sort of split. If a team really needs a tight end, maybe they want Dalton Schultz. Go see what you can get for him because I don't think he's got value going forward. So with that, that'll be it for this video. It was a long one. Really hope you guys enjoyed that. I really love making these videos. It's my favorite video to make each week. If you guys have any buy or sell questions, any trade offers that you've got coming in or going out, you want my opinion on, just feel free to ask me in the comments. You can hit me up on Twitter. My DMs are open. Twitter is @RealSteelFFB. If you did like this video, please be sure to like, click subscribe, and click the bell so you get notifications when I upload videos. I normally do a video like this every week. I'll do a waiver wire video, and then I will do a start sit video where I'll go through each game and sort of explain to you which players I think are worth starting. I've got an extremely unrealistic goal of reaching 500 subscribers by the end of the season. We're sitting around 80 right now. So I guess step one's getting to 100. So let's see if we can get to 100 in the next couple of weeks and go from there. But really, please do give me a like, subscribe to the channel if you like what I'm doing here. I really love helping you guys out, and I want to keep helping you guys out going through the season. We're going to make your teams better each week. That's how you win your fantasy league. Even if you're 0-3 right now, you're just a couple of trades away from being a legitimate contender. You just got to keep getting better throughout the season and don't give up, and you will come out on top more often than not as long as you just keep striving to improve your roster every single week. So with that, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day and go win your matchups this week.